sis. Have you ever had like a conversation that it ended hours ago? I mean hours ago, but then it's like your mind just kept replaying it anyway. It just kept going back and back and back and back to the same conversation. And then what was happening is you was like thinking about like the person's tone that you had the conversation with. You may have like try to interpret like what they meant by what they said and what you should have said different, or how many times you could have said this and you should have said that. And now that you think about it, there's about 5 or 10 more things that you could add to the combination of things that you didn't get to say. And it's like no matter how much time goes by and how much time you try to move on how many ever times, your mind just keeps still going back to the same moment because there's things that you didn't get to say, and now it's replaying in your mind over and over and over. Yep. And then also you may be wondering like, why can't I let this go? Like what why can I not let this go? And then it's like you just mentally keep replaying it. If that's you, sis, let's talk about it, because in this video, what we're going to talk about is things that's going to help you understand like why that you keep circling around the same conversation that's been, it could be hours ago, it could have been even days ago, but it's still in your mind because you still remember the conversation and the things that, that keep swirling, that I could have said this or I should have said that. And then so let's get into it, because overthinking is basically what it is, and it's not random. It's not random, because there's a reason that like your mind keeps going back to the same conversation. So let's talk about like why this happens. So like when a conversation doesn't like sit right with you, or your what happens is that your brain, it just doesn't move on. Just because the conversation was over, your brain is still trying to process it. Yep. And so what happens is it starts scanning, like trying to figure out, like, was that conversation even safe? Did something feel off about that, or the conversation, or the person, or the people? And did you miss something? Like, what did you miss in all of this? So that's how your mind is going back thinking about this. And then let's go a little deeper, because like from a internal aspect, what's happening is it's like your nervous system is always trying to protect you. So what happens is that when something feels uncomfortable that you may encounter or deal with, like a situation, a conversation, and if it's confusing or even like emotionally charged, what happens is that your brain flags, pay attention to this, pay attention. And so that's why you're still staying alert. And that's when the loop starts, because it's like you're paying attention and now you're rethinking everything. And so now you're in this thinking loop. And so it just starts looping. And that's why you can't forget about it. That's why you keep going back saying, I should have did this and that, because now you've entered into a loop. And so I like analogies. And if this is your first time watching my channel, I love giving analogies to make it make sense, right? And make it plain. So it's like, picture this, like your brain leaves, like say you have a book, right? And you're reading a book or something, and you have a tab, the tabs that's on the book. It's kind of like leaving that page open, because it never got resolved. And so you never closed it. You tabbed it because you want to mark that space right there because you need to finish it, or you need to go back to it for whatever reason. So that tab is still there in the book or wherever you put it. And so now you need to keep going back to it because it was never finished. So what happens is it's like instead of like closing the whole conversation, your mind just keeps going back and back and back to try to find clarity to close that tab. So that's kind of how it happens. And so let's talk about too, like sometimes it can hurt. And let's talk about why it can hurt sometimes so much. Because it's sometimes it's not just the fact of the conversation itself. It could have been like what it struck or what it touched inside you, like it struck a nerve or something like that. It could have been like it hit something deep or it kind of triggered something. So that could be why that tab is there and why you're kind of like, okay, I'm not finished here. Maybe like, for example, it could be like rejection or things like maybe like you felt like you weren't heard or they didn't hear you out and get your side of the story, or they just said what they had to say and it was over before you could even get your words in. Or maybe it reminds you of something older that had been discussed or a situation from the past, and so now it kind of opens it up and that loop starts. And so what happens is it's like your body doesn't separate the then versus now, because all it knows is it's open now, and so we're going to deal with this. And so that's when the circling begins and the looping, because your body is not differentiating between the then and the now. Okay. And so all it does is response like, okay, pay attention, be on alert. Okay, so let's talk about internally what's happening inside your body. You guys know I'm a nurse, and so I love kind of taking you deeper to see what's going on. So, like internally, that tension that you may feel, what that is your body is actually holding on to that actual moment. Okay, and so your nervous system, what it's doing is it's trying to process it, trying to make sense of it, trying to protect you and trying to protect your body from it happening again. So what happens is that's when you get that loop, because it keeps replaying it, not because you're weak or anything like that, but because your brain is still trying to resolve something that still feels unfinished. And so that's why when you have those loops and you start keep going back to the same thing, I should have did this, or why didn't I do that, and this hurts so bad, and I can't get over this, and I'm sick of this, and I don't understand, because you're in that loop. It kind of tore open that wound. Now you put that tab there, and now you're in that loop right there. It's like assessing. You're just rotating that tab, but it's never like completing the book. Okay, and so let's talk about how you can actually start calming it down some though. So what you could do is like, instead of like fighting the thought, you could ask yourself, like you can pause and just kind of ask yourself like, what about that moment didn't feel right? What about that moment made me uncomfortable or took me back there? So you could also like give your brain like a little bit of clarity, because you're trying to figure out like, what about that didn't sit right? What about that moment, took me there? You could so what that does is that it kind of gives you that space to kind of process a little bit, so that you don't have to keep searching, because you're saying, hey, what about it? You're sitting in it to see what about that moment made you feel like that. And then you could also ground yourself too, like in truth. You could say, you know what, that conversation's over, this happened. And then you could just say, you know what, I need to just move along. I know it's easier said than done, but that's over. And so I'm not going to carry this into the next conversation, because this conversation has already ended. And so also remember too that scripture reminds us that we need to be still and know that he is God. You could also say, Lord, you know what? This was frustrating. That hurt me. Or, I don't know why I can't stop thinking about this, but you take this on, because you said you wouldn't put too much on me than I could bear. And so, he says also be anxious for nothing. And so you know what? I'm not going to even be anxious about this. I'm just going to give it to you. Okay. So not everything needs to be figured out tonight. Sometimes you may figure some things out down the road and it all may click or whatever, but not everything needs to be handled right now and get the answer right now. So I know I had to work on that too, because I'll think and think and think and think, and I'll think about 20 other things, and then it's like, but what is that? What purpose is that serving me right now? So, we just need to close the loop and say, okay, that's over right now. And so this message is basically a gentle reminder to close the loop, and just to remind you, if you find yourself going back and back and back, then you're entering that loop because it's the same thing and you keep asking the same thing. And remember that tab, you have that tab on that page of that story, you should have it open and you haven't closed it. Okay, so I hope this message helped you. If it did, please like and subscribe. My name is Melinda. I'm a registered nurse, life coach, and mentor. And on our channel, we focus on faith, healing, and emotional wellness. And if any part of this message has touched you, please like and subscribe. I'm a newer channel and I'm trying to grow our YouTube family. So thank you for stopping by to watch, and have a blessed day. And as always, I'm wishing you peace, love, joy, and happiness. Bye.